Chosen one, have you noticed how certain people keep staring lately? They look at you with confusion. They look at old photos, compare them to who you are now, and quietly wonder how you seem more vibrant after surviving battles that should have drained you. Some of them won't say it out loud, but they are asking themselves the same question. How are you glowing after everything you've been through? Because according to the world's logic, you should be exhausted. The betrayals should have hardened you. The disappointments should have aged you. The spiritual warfare should have left visible scars. Instead, many chosen ones discover the opposite. They become calmer, stronger, more radiant, more alive than they were before the storm. And that is where people become confused. They assume your transformation is physical, but the real transformation was spiritual. You see, most people think aging is only about time. They believe the clock moves the same way for everyone. But there is another force that quietly shapes a person's vitality, the weight they carry. Bitterness has weight. Resentment has weight. Chronic stress has weight. Living in constant conflict has weight. And over time, those burdens leave marks. That is why your glow is not an accident. You didn't just survive difficult seasons. You released them. You let go of toxic connections. You stopped carrying battles that did not belong to you. You stepped away from drama that was draining your spirit. You chose peace over chaos, alignment over confusion, truth over performance. And something remarkable happened. The moment you dropped the baggage, your energy started returning. The moment you stopped feeding negativity, your light became stronger. The moment you detached from toxicity, your spirit had room to breathe again. That is why today's message is so important. Because what people are noticing is not just a change in your appearance. They are witnessing the physical effects of spiritual alignment. And that is a kind of transformation no amount of bitterness can imitate. One of the biggest misconceptions people have about aging is that it is driven entirely by time. But chosen one, look around. Have you ever met someone who is young in years but already looks exhausted by life? Have you ever met someone decades older who still carries an energy that feels vibrant, peaceful, and alive? That is because time is only part of the equation. The other part is what a person is connected to every day. Most people spend their lives inside a system that constantly drains them. They wake up stressed. They move through life trying to satisfy expectations that do not belong to them. They suppress their intuition. They ignore their spirit. They force themselves into environments that make them miserable. They stay connected to relationships that deplete them. They carry emotional burdens they were never meant to carry. Year after year, decade after decade, and eventually the weight begins showing. Not just emotionally, physically. You can see it in their eyes. You can hear it in their voice. You can feel it in their energy. The light becomes dimmer. The enthusiasm fades. The sense of wonder disappears. They are technically alive, but spiritually exhausted. That is what happens when someone spends years living according to a script that was never designed for their soul. But chosen ones often experience something different. Not because life is easier. In many cases, your path has been harder. The difference is that at some point, you escaped the script. You stopped blindly following expectations. You stopped living solely for approval. You stopped shaping your life around what everyone else wanted. And although that freedom came with challenges, it also came with something priceless. Alignment. Read that again. Alignment. Because there is a unique kind of energy that returns to a person when their outer life finally begins matching their inner truth. The constant tension starts disappearing. The endless performance begins fading. The exhausting effort of pretending becomes unnecessary. And the body notices. The mind notices. The spirit notices. That is why many chosen ones seem to go through a strange transformation after major awakenings. Instead of becoming weaker, they often become more radiant. Instead of becoming drained, they become more energized. Instead of looking defeated by life, they begin looking increasingly alive. People notice it. They may not understand it, but they notice it, because authentic living carries a different frequency than survival mode. Think about how much energy it takes to live a life that is not aligned with who you truly are. Think about how exhausting it is to constantly seek approval, suppress your intuition, ignore your purpose, and remain connected to situations that no longer fit your spirit. That exhaustion accumulates. Most people never realize how much energy they lose maintaining a version of themselves that no longer feels true. You did. And once you realized it, you started making changes. Small changes at first, then bigger ones. You walked away from environments that drained you. You stopped chasing people who only valued your usefulness. You stopped forcing connections that lacked authenticity. You stopped participating in cycles that repeatedly stole your peace. And every time you did, something heavy left your system. Not overnight, but gradually. Like removing layers of weight you did not realize you were carrying. That is why your transformation feels so confusing to some people. They watched you lose things. They watched you walk away from certain relationships. They watched you endure isolation. They watched you go through difficult seasons. And according to conventional thinking, all of that should have weakened you. Instead, it strengthened you. Because what they interpreted as loss was actually liberation. What they saw as isolation was actually alignment. What they viewed as sacrifice was actually freedom. You were not falling apart. You were stepping outside the grid. And outside that grid, something remarkable happened. Your spirit stopped spending so much energy fighting against itself. Your soul stopped carrying responsibilities that were never yours. Your life began moving closer to truth. And truth has a way of restoring energy that deception quietly consumes. That is why people keep noticing something different about you. Not because you discovered some secret formula, but because you finally stopped carrying a life that did not belong to you. And when a chosen one reaches that level of alignment, the effects become visible in ways that even words struggle to explain. One of the most powerful decisions you ever made was not adding something to your life. It was removing things from it. Because people often talk about detoxing the body, but very few talk about detoxing the spirit. Very few recognize how much energy is lost through constant exposure to gossip, unnecessary conflict, fake friendships, emotional chaos, and relationships that operate like slow leaks in the soul. For years, many chosen ones carried those burdens without realizing it. They tolerated conversations that left them drained. They entertained connections that offered very little peace. They stayed available to people who only appeared when they needed something. They repeatedly entered cycles that produced stress but never produced growth. And eventually, the cost became impossible to ignore. That is when the fast began. Not a fast from food, a fast from foolishness. Read that again. A fast from foolishness. You stopped feeding environments that thrived on drama. You stopped participating in conversations built around gossip. You stopped giving unlimited access to people who treated your energy like a public resource. You stopped trying to rescue individuals committed to their own dysfunction. And something remarkable happened. Your energy started returning. Because every toxic connection demands maintenance. Every fake alliance requires performance. Every unhealthy dynamic consumes emotional resources. Even when you are not actively dealing with the situation, part of your mind remains occupied by it. That creates constant pressure, constant tension, constant fatigue. Many people live with that pressure for so long that they mistake it for normal life. You didn't. At some point, your spirit recognized the pattern. It recognized that peace was impossible while chaos still had unlimited access. It recognized that healing could not fully happen while the same draining influences remained attached. It recognized that growth required separation. So you started letting go. Not out of hatred, not out of revenge, out of wisdom. And every release created more room for peace. The gossip disappeared. The drama decreased. The emotional noise faded. The endless need to explain yourself began dissolving. And suddenly, your nervous system was dealing with far less conflict than it had before. That matters more than most people realize. Because the body keeps score of every battle, every argument, every betrayal, every stressful interaction. Every situation that forces you into constant emotional vigilance leaves an imprint. The mind may try to move on, but the system still carries the tension. When you removed those sources of tension, your entire life began responding. You slept differently. You thought differently. You carried yourself differently. You felt lighter. And that lightness became visible. People started noticing something they could not quite explain. The same person was standing in front of them, but the energy was different. The face looked softer. The eyes looked clearer. The presence felt stronger. Not because time reversed, because burden was removed. That is what many people fail to understand. Peace is powerful, not passive, powerful, because every day you refuse unnecessary drama is a day your spirit gets to recover. Every day you avoid toxic cycles is a day your energy stays available for your purpose. Every day you choose alignment over chaos is another day your inner world becomes stronger. That is why fasting from foolishness became one of the greatest upgrades of your life. You did not just protect your peace. You protected your vitality. And the results are becoming impossible for people not to notice. What many people never realize is that the body responds to truth, not just emotionally, physically. Because for a long time, many chosen ones were living in environments that forced them to constantly fight against what they already knew. They ignored red flags. They tolerated relationships that felt wrong. They remained loyal to people who repeatedly violated trust. They stayed connected to situations that their spirit had already outgrown. And that creates internal conflict. Imagine carrying a truth inside your soul while your daily life forces you to pretend that truth does not exist. Imagine constantly sensing that something is unhealthy, dishonest, or misaligned, yet continuing to expose yourself to it anyway. That tension may not always be visible, but it is real. The nervous system feels it. The mind feels it. The body feels it. That is why so many chosen ones felt exhausted during certain chapters of their lives. Not because they were weak, not because they lacked faith, but because they were spending enormous amounts of energy surviving environments that contradicted their spirit. Every interaction required caution. Every conversation required emotional management. Every day involved navigating hidden agendas, manipulation, or uncertainty. That kind of existence creates constant internal warfare. And warfare is expensive. Read that again. Warfare is expensive. It costs energy. It costs peace. It costs vitality. The body was never designed to remain in a perpetual state of emotional defense. That is why everything started changing when you finally chose truth. When you stopped forcing relationships that no longer aligned. When you stopped pretending not to see what you clearly saw. When you stopped sacrificing your peace to maintain unhealthy connections. When you stopped negotiating with your own discernment. Something inside you relaxed. The battle ended. Not every external battle. The internal one. And that distinction matters. Because once your soul no longer had to fight against itself, your system finally had permission to heal. The energy once spent on survival became available for restoration. The attention once consumed by drama became available for growth. The emotional resources once trapped in conflict became available for purpose. That is why many chosen ones experience profound changes after periods of alignment. They sleep better, think more clearly, feel more grounded, appear more vibrant, not because life suddenly became perfect, but because they stopped living in constant opposition to their own truth. The nervous system loves safety, and one of the greatest forms of safety is congruence. When your spirit, your mind, and your actions begin moving in the same direction, the pressure starts dissolving. The constant friction begins disappearing. The energy leak closes, and healing accelerates. That is what people are noticing when they say you seem different. They are witnessing the biological response to truth. They are seeing what happens when a chosen one finally stops carrying lies that never belonged to them. They are seeing what happens when peace replaces chronic conflict. They are seeing what happens when alignment replaces performance. The glow they notice is not just physical. It is the visible evidence of a soul that is no longer fighting itself. And there is something incredibly powerful about that. Because once a chosen one reaches this level of alignment, their energy begins communicating a message before they ever speak a word. The war is over, and healing has begun. Now comes the contrast that many people are quietly noticing but rarely talk about openly. While you have been getting lighter, some of the people who opposed you have been getting heavier. Not physically, but emotionally, spiritually, and energetically. Because there is a price attached to carrying bitterness year after year. There is a price attached to maintaining resentment, replaying old wounds, protecting false narratives, and investing enormous amounts of energy into negativity. Eventually, that burden starts showing. At first, it appears as exhaustion, then frustration, then cynicism, then a kind of emotional hardness that begins affecting every area of a person's life. The smile becomes less genuine. The joy becomes harder to access. The mind becomes trapped in old stories, old conflicts, and old grievances. Because bitterness was never designed to be carried forever. It was meant to be processed, learned from, and released. But some people refuse to let it go. Instead, they keep collecting disappointments. They keep replaying betrayals. They keep feeding resentment until it becomes part of their identity. They convince themselves that holding on to anger gives them power, when in reality it is slowly draining the very life out of them. And over time, the effects become visible. Not because the universe is punishing them, because carrying emotional poison always has consequences. You can hear it in the way they speak. Every conversation circles back to blame. Every story revolves around what someone did to them. Every interaction carries an undercurrent of frustration, comparison, judgment, or control. They become trapped inside emotional loops they no longer know how to escape. Meanwhile, your journey has been moving in the opposite direction. You have been releasing toxic relationships, releasing old battles, releasing unnecessary drama, releasing the need to control how everyone sees you, releasing emotional weight that never belonged to you in the first place. And every release created more room for peace. That is why the contrast is becoming so obvious. The chosen one becomes lighter while the bitter person becomes heavier. The chosen one becomes calmer while the bitter person becomes more restless. The chosen one becomes more aligned while the bitter person becomes increasingly consumed by their own emotional baggage. People notice it. They may not understand it completely, but they notice it. Because according to logic, you should be the exhausted one. You survived betrayal. You endured disappointment. You walked through seasons of isolation. You carried responsibilities that would have overwhelmed many people. Yet somehow, you seem stronger now than you did before. More peaceful, more grounded, more vibrant. Why? Because you processed the pain instead of building a home inside it. That was the difference. While they were feeding resentment, you were feeding healing. While they were feeding obsession, you were feeding growth. While they were carrying the weight of old battles, you were learning how to put them down. And those choices compound over time, day by day, month by month, year by year, until eventually the difference becomes impossible to hide. Now, this is not about celebrating anyone else's decline. It is about understanding a spiritual principle. What we carry eventually shapes us. If we carry peace, peace begins changing us. If we carry purpose, purpose begins strengthening us. If we carry bitterness, bitterness eventually starts shaping our thoughts, our energy, our perspective, and even the way we move through the world. That is why your glow is not really about appearance. It is about freedom. Freedom from burdens that once drained your spirit. Freedom from emotional warfare that once consumed your energy. Freedom from carrying people, conflicts, and expectations that were never yours to carry. And that freedom creates a kind of vitality that bitterness can never imitate. Because in the end, healing always ages better than resentment. Chosen one, there is one final truth you need to understand. The radiance people notice is not just about health, appearance, or energy. It is about purpose. Because there is something different about a person who has survived storms without allowing those storms to corrupt their spirit. There is something different about someone who has walked through betrayal and still chooses peace, who has faced darkness and still chooses truth, who has been given countless reasons to become bitter but instead chooses healing. That kind of person carries a different light, and people feel it before they can explain it. They notice it in your presence. They notice it in your calmness. They notice it in the way you no longer seem desperate for validation, attention, or approval. There is a steadiness about you that was not there before, a quiet confidence that does not need to announce itself. That is what many chosen ones mistake for physical transformation. But the deeper transformation happened within. You stopped fighting yourself. You stopped carrying unnecessary burdens. You stopped allowing chaos to occupy permanent space in your life. And as that weight disappeared, something older and more authentic began shining through. Your true nature, your purpose, your alignment. That is why some people struggle to understand your glow. They keep searching for an external explanation because they cannot see the internal journey that created it. They did not witness the healing. They did not witness the release. They did not witness the spiritual battles that led to this peace. They only see the result. And the result is someone who appears lighter, calmer, stronger, and more alive. So when people notice your energy, do not dismiss it. It is not vanity. It is evidence. Evidence that you survived the storm without becoming the storm. Evidence that your spirit remained intact. Evidence that the light you carry was never meant to be hidden. So before we close this message, remember this, chosen one. The greatest thing you released was not a person, a situation, or a season. It was the weight. The weight of trying to save everyone. The weight of carrying battles that were not yours. The weight of explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. The weight of drama, resentment, and emotional burdens that slowly drain the life out of a person. And the moment you started putting that weight down, everything began changing. Your peace deepened. Your energy returned. Your spirit became stronger. Your light became brighter. That is why you do not need to worry about who is watching, comparing, or trying to figure out why you seem different. Let them wonder. Let them speculate. Let them search for answers. The truth is simple. You stopped carrying what was destroying them. And because you chose healing over bitterness, growth over resentment, and alignment over chaos, your spirit finally had room to shine. So keep protecting your peace. Keep choosing truth. Keep walking away from what drains you. And most importantly, keep glowing from the inside out. If this message spoke directly to your spirit today, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with another chosen one who needs this reminder. And in the comments, type, "I dropped the baggage." Let that declaration remind you that your greatest transformation began the moment you stopped carrying what was never yours to hold.